even Vajpayee, he was definitely more popular than the BJP, but he didn't have Modi level popularity.
In 2020,
Right.
when you said we
Yeah.
are already living in a Hindu Rashtra,
Yes.
what did you mean?
If you're playing against a fantastic bowling team and you have to always play on the back foot, you become Rahul Dravid. So Advani and Vajpayee became Rahul Dravid.
And Modi is Virat Kohli.
Modi is Virat Kohli. In the short term, the opposition should not worry about ideology, right? Because, what is the ideology that connects, Samajwadi Party, Congress? It's a Belpuri. It feels like the Congress is schizophrenic. But that's the design of the Congress that Gandhi created. That 100 years from now has not changed. It's the Big Tent party of Indian nationalism.
But there is the idea, when you close your eyes and you think of Modi alone. Is there a Jugalbandi anymore? As the author of Jugalbandi, the BJP Before Modi, I think the obvious question in this moment, when Prime Minister Modi seems to be literally the most powerful Prime Minister that I can remember, because I wasn't born in the Indira Gandhi era and one only reads of that. The most obvious question would be, what is the difference in the BJP before and after Modi?
So the intuitive argument which your listeners already know is that the style of functioning is very different, right? One or two people call the shots in this government. That wasn't the case in the BJP before Modi. But the reason it wasn't the case wasn't just because there was some deeply held belief and consensus. The heart of the issue was that no single person in the BJP, including Vajpayee, really towered above everybody else. Certainly not Advani. And even Vajpayee, he was definitely more popular than the BJP, but he didn't have Modi level popularity. The other thing about Vajpayee was that he wasn't a conventional mass politician in that he couldn't really win a state. And Vajpayee really comes to his own as a national figure after his resignation speech in 1996, which is the first televised speech in Parliament. So yes, there is this difference in, one was a more consensus style BJP, the other is a BJP in which one or two people kind of make the final decision, even though the inputs come from everybody else. But a lot of it is because there's a general popularity imbalance between Modi and everyone else in the BJP. The second counterintuitive point, Barkha, is that in my opinion at least, the ideology is not that dissimilar from each other.
Really? That's interesting.
That's the counterintuitive point. So there's this idea that, there's this joke, Barkha, that, yesterday's conservatives are today's liberals, right?
Yeah.
So those who, used to say that, Advani was, hardliner number one, now suddenly that he's got the Bharat Ratna, the opposition kind of make him out to be this, soft line, moderate voice compared to the hardline Modi.
Yeah.
And as it will be in the decades to come.
Yeah.
But really, Vajpayee, Advani, Narendra Modi had the same view of India. It is the Hindutva view. The circumstances were different. The Nehruvian ideology, the Congress party dominated for much of Vajpayee and Advani's career. They had to play on back foot.
One of the things you argued in your book, or have argued in your book, is that Vajpayee and Advani were still, in a way, operating within what you call the Nehruvian consensus. And the difference might be that Prime Minister Modi has broken the Nehruvian consensus. What is this Nehruvian consensus?
So the Nehruvian consensus, Barkha, at least the way I define it, has three components to it. Firstly, it is this idea on secularism, which is a Nehru and Nehruvianism had a particular worry that a Hindu majority country should not become a Hindu majority state. So there was no worry in the 50s and 60s that India would adopt Sharia law. It's out of the question.
Right.
So that wasn't the worry.
Right.
But there was a real worry Nehru felt that, what is happening now would happen in the 50s. He opposed it entirely, which is why he did not go for the inauguration of Somnath. He didn't do it, right? He wanted to keep that line. Now the BJP interprets this as the anti-Hindu view of Nehru. That's not entirely true. I don't think that's fair. But certainly Nehru had this particular worry of Hinduism taking control of the state. So that's the Nehruvian consensus when it came to secularism. that there was also a Nehruvian consensus when it came to development, which is that traditional Indian society is unable to develop India. Do not trust the village, do not trust the villager, don't trust the local baniya, trust the joint secretary in order to bring about change in India. Now, in this, Nehru had similar views to Mao, to Stalin, to other third world modernizers who wanted in 20-30 years to develop with the speed that it took England 500 years to develop. And their answer is that our traditional societies can't do it. So this the BJP interprets to be Nehru's contempt for traditional society, right?
When you say that there is no, in your opinion, no big ideological difference between the BJP before and after Modi, right? That's effectively the argument you're making. There are any number of people who would argue that there was a consensus building approach to the BJP of Vajpayee, and that consensus is being disrupted, right, by the BJP of Modi, and that is the difference.
So I don't disagree on the facts. The question is why, right? So is that being disrupted because the Modi government has a different view of running, of consensus? Or is it disrupted because, Narendra Modi is simply far more popular than Vajpayee ever was within the party? He's able to win elections.
So you're saying if Vajpayee and Advani could have abrogated 370, if they could have somehow, the mandir has come from the Supreme Court, but it is still politically seen to be Modi's moment. If they had the political clout and the popularity to do many of the things that have been done under the Modi government, they would have.
So, the counterfactual is hard, but that's where my argument is going.
Okay.
But the counterfactual is hard to say because you wear the mask long enough, Barkha, it becomes your face. So for 40, 50 years...
Or as Govindacharya said, ye to mukhota hai about
Vajpayee's
but
I mean it,
moderation.
But I don't mean it in that sense only. I also mean it that the BJP itself had to be on back foot, because it was operating under this Nehruvian consensus. So it had to wear the parliamentary mask, for so many decades. Then I think Advani changed, that Vajpayee changed. But that change was because of the circumstances. To put it differently, if you're playing against a fantastic bowling, team, and you have to always play on the back foot, you become Rahul Dravid. So Advani and Vajpayee became Rahul Dravid.
And Modi is Virat Kohli.
And the opposition is also much weaker. He's also much more attacking.
Yeah.
So you play attack long enough, you become Virat Kohli. You play back foot long enough, you become Rahul Dravid. So again, it's very hard in these matters to get the counterfactual exactly right. But on Article 370, for example, there was no daylight between Advani, Vajpayee, Narendra Modi, Amit Shah. There's no daylight. I mean, it's a code, and it's not just them. Since the 1950s, Hindu nationalists have been saying that this is wrong, it should be removed. Shama Prasad Mukherjee protested hugely against, the special status to Kashmir.
One flag, one constitution.
Yeah, so if anything, Barkha, Narendra Modi is a disciplined soldier of a 100-year movement. His personality is different. His style of functioning is different. But on core ideological issues, there's not 1 inch daylight between him and the RSS.
The phrase that you used in your book and that you have used more recently after the Bharat Ratna has been announced for L.K. Advani is Hindutva Fevicol. And I find it a fascinating phrase because it basically conveys that no matter how popular individuals may be, no matter how deep the differences may be among these individuals in the Sangh Parivar, the idea of Hindu unity will paper over the cracks, will gloss over the cracks, and that is what you see in the decision by the Modi government to give Mr. Advani this Bharat Ratna. Now let me be contrarian and argue against that. The argument, Advani relegated, Advani basically benched, basically retired by being put on the Margdarshak Mandal. What does it actually cost the Modi government to give him a Bharat Ratna in the twilight of his life? Why is this an example of Hindutva Fevicol? You would say what?
Well, I would say that Hindutva Fevicol is staying together even when you don't have power. That is the key. Right? Of course, when you have power, you can be magnanimous. So in the example you give, all the power is with Narendra Modi. And so he is, he can afford to be magnanimous. But, all the power has been with him since 2014.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in all those years, he has not given, Advani was still a Padma Vibhushan. And why is it that he was given Bharat Ratna just a few days after Karpuri Thakur has been given Bharat Ratna? It is to recognize the two genies that I would say came out of the bottle in 1990, which is Mandal and Mandir. Right? And these are the two powerful forces of India that redefine India, that have brought Modi to power. It's part of a larger ideological worldview. And in order to further this ideological worldview, Narendra Modi has not allowed his personal ego to come in the middle of it. That is the point. That this is not a petty act. It is an act of generosity. And it is even more magnanimous, or as magnanimous an act of generosity was around October, November 1995, when Advani could have been the prime ministerial candidate of the BJP, could well have been the first prime minister, BJP prime minister in India. I don't know if the allies would have liked it. But he understood that it wouldn't have been a stable coalition, and he, going against the RSS view on the matter, supports Vajpayee. Vajpayee becomes the PM candidate. That again is an example of Hindutva Fevicol. So this particular decision of Modi is a continuation of a long stream which defines Hindu nationalism, where unity and sacrifice is higher than individual self-interest.
So Mandal and Kamandal is a sort of embraced by the BJP in recent years, but Mandal was not the BJP's brainchild, it was VP Singh's brainchild. One of the arguments that you make is that Advani is not given enough credit for not opposing the politics of Mandal. But where does Mandal fit in with the idea of Hindu unity? Because you see, it is caste and caste politics that stratifies the consolidated Hindu identity, right?
You're absolutely right. And so the next step to the fact that caste defines Hindu unity is that caste should not become a political issue among Hindus, right? Now, cut to August 1990. VP Singh has just announced the Mandal Commission. So the Mandal Commission itself is a culmination of backward caste quotas in state politics in North India, which began with Karpuri Thakur, which itself is a continuation of backward caste quotas in South India, which began in the 50s and 60s itself, right? So there's a long history which culminates in Mandal. Now, Advani realizes very clearly that the urban upper caste base of the BJP is protesting against Mandal. They're setting themselves on fire. You would remember them, I think, as a student.
I also remember, without understanding anything about caste, being a totally stereotypical, deracinated, Delhi liberal, marching against Mandal. Partly because as a young college student, I wanted something to march against and it was exciting. Partly because in my privileged understanding of caste, to deny caste was the progressive position. It's journalism that informed me otherwise. So, I mean, I just remember Mandal so well, but I think that we've never really politically, even today, we are debating how far do you go with this politics of Mandal. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm very curious to understand how this stratification, let's say OBC politics, reservation politics, is in synchronicity with the idea of a consolidated Hindu vote.
So it's not obvious. That's the first point. It was not obvious to Advani in August 1990 that Mandal comes. To give you an example, it's not just you who marched against Mandal. Rajiv Gandhi Congress Party opposed the Mandal Commission, saying that actually on progressive grounds that you're bringing caste into politics, right? Advani's genius, it's underappreciated genius, that against the core original base of the BJP, he understood that if the BJP was only an upper caste North Indian party, it would, forget representing Hindus, it would not win elections. It would be confined to 7% of the vote share, right? And it is his genius that he supports the Mandal Commission, and he moves the BJP to support the Mandal Commission.
To in some ways the OBC party that it is today.
To the OBC party that it is today, and voters respond. So early opinion polls, early survey saying that the jump of the BJP from its 7% vote share, which is historical since the 1950s, to about 20-21%, which happens under Mandir, is not just because of the Ayodhya movement, it's also because the BJP understood that you have to unite these two segments of Hindu population to come together, but change the conversation into Mandir. So I think that's an underappreciated part of what Advani did. And the natural culmination of that is an OBC Prime Minister who gets a large percentage of the OBC, especially EBC vote. So I think that understanding was counterintuitive at that time. I mean, most BJP leaders would prefer marching with you against Mandal in 1990.
And to be clear, I don't believe that my position was a well-informed position.
Yeah, absolutely,
It was a
absolutely.
Young collegiate
That's right.
understanding of politics, very different from my politics today. But to come back to this idea of Hindutva Fevicol, the Hindu is not a monolith.
Yes.
Hinduism is not a codified religion. There is no one book that defines or describes who is Hindu. It has been famously said and argued that even atheists have a place within Hinduism. Justice J.S. Verma said of the Supreme Court said Hinduism is a way of life, right? That idea of Hinduism and Hindutva are not always on the same page. So when you look at the Mandir movement, what do you see? Because you have said that there is no daylight between Vajpayee, Advani, Modi and Shah on key issues. The Mandir movement was seen to be, by many critics of the government, as a announcement of the Hindu Rashtra. But I was reading some of your old writings, and in 2020, you said, we are already living in the Hindu Rashtra. Explain what you meant then and whether anything has shifted today in 2024.
So I want to answer this question in two parts. Sorry, as an academic, I give long answers, so I apologize for that.
The whole idea of this conversation is to go beyond bite-sized nuggets. So
no, but I am sorry for that. So let's try to sort of get at the first question you asked, which is the Hinduism versus Hindutva.
Yeah.
The description that you just gave of Hinduism is not just accurate. It is exactly what Hindu nationalists believe Hinduism is. The difference is you celebrate it, right? But for Hindu nationalists like Savarkar, this sort of enormous diversity, lack of a code was the ideological lack of unity that ensured that Hindus were praised for invaders again and again and again, right? In the 20th century, the idea of invaders is replaced by the idea of elections. Right? So Hindus lack unity. That's why they lose on the battlefield, in the third battle of Panipat. In the 20th century, Hindus lack unity, unlike Muslims. That's why they lose in the electoral field. Right? The entire 100-year project of Hindu nationalism, what we call Hindutva, is the creation of a modern Hindu vote bank. And it is precisely because traditional Hinduism lacks this ability that you need a vehicle like, otherwise if the traditional Hinduism can convert easily to Hindutva, what do you need the RSS for? What do you need Savarkar for?
Sorry to interrupt you, but Arun Jaitley used to, I think, say that it's about converting the cultural Hindu into a political Hindu.
That's right. Or rather, cultural Hindus because into a political Hindu.
Yeah.
But in order to convert them to a political Hindu, you need an underlying common cultural base, right? Now, the opinion is divided whether in doing this, Hindutva has changed Hinduism so much that it's not Hinduism anymore. I won't buy that, right? I think it's a modernist response. Just like other religions, if you look at the Buddhism of, Dharampala in Sri Lanka, if you look at political Islam of Sayyid Qutb, if you look at the Christianity of the Christian Democrats in Europe, of course they are changing religion a little bit when it's entering politics. So Hindutva does the same thing. But it would be too much to say that the political incarnation of Hinduism has nothing to do with Hinduism. That's not, that's too much of a stretch. And whatever your and my view of the subject, millions of Hindus in India see the vehicle of their religious expression to be the BJP. They don't think Hindutva and Hinduism is different. The Ram Mandir movement is a Hindutva project. From 1,000 years from now, it will be seen as a Hindu project.
So explain to me, a lot to ask on that. Indira Gandhi is actually the first to Hinduize mainstream politics, right? And if you read Nirja Chaudhary's excellent book, she actually talks about how Indira Gandhi enjoyed a very good relationship with the RSS. And the RSS at moments preferred her to Vajpayee. And Indira Gandhi is visibly sort of the temple runs that today opposition politicians are scrambling to do. Indira Gandhi did them very organically, and she understood that language. Why then does the Hindu voter, as has been shaped and consolidated by the BJP today, look at the BJP as the vehicle and not the Congress of Indira? Is it because the Congress stopped being the Congress of Indira? Or what happened?
So, again, it's a long answer. But the way I see it in my book, Indira Gandhi is not Hinduizing India. She's the first politician smart enough to respond to a Hinduizing India. Right? In other words, so of course there's a top-down element of kind of shaping a Hindu vote bank. But in the early 80s, Barkha, a nascent Hindu vote bank is being created for ground-up reasons. And these are three ground-up reasons. One is there's just economic anxiety. Right? In that period, the economy is going to tank. We see when it comes to Trump also that when the economy goes down, the poor tend to vote on the basis of their religion and ethnicity rather than on their class. Second is the extension of backward caste reservations in North India by Karpuri Thakur, etc. What would culminate a decade later in the Mandal movement is creating anxiety among upper caste Hindus. All this in the early 80s. And third is the Khalistan movement is killing Hindus of all castes and communities. They are not only targeting upper caste Hindus. So in North India, that's also creating this anxiety, right? There is this bottom-up anxiety. Indira Gandhi sees this with remarkable clarity. Right? And she's the first retail politician to now start visiting temples. I think in 82 or 83, there were these Jammu and Kashmir state elections where she explicitly played the religion card, saying that I will protect you from the Muslim National Conference. Right? So she's a better, in that sense, she's a better grassroots politician than the BJP was at that time. So in that sense, she's able to see trends the way Modi is able to see, and the way Vajpayee and Advani were not quite able to see so clearly. So that's the first point, that Hindu nationalism, of course, it was nurtured by the RSS, etc., but there's also a ground-up element to it that we should appreciate, right? The second question you're asking is that, okay, if especially Rajiv, but even Indira Gandhi, they were the first to understand the Hindu vote bank. Why did the vote go to the BJP eventually? That's a complex question, right? The design of the Congress party is that it has to be everything to everybody. So while it's a big tent, right? That's its DNA. There's nothing you can do about it. So all that it's doing to get the Hindu vote bank in the 1980s, it's also trying to get to the Muslim vote bank, right? So similarly, you have the Shah Bano judgment.
That's right.
Similarly, you have the banning of Salman Rushdie's satanic verses, right? That's not because the Congress is a Muslim party or Hindu party. It wants in an ideal world to be a Hindu and a Muslim party. Right? But in a highly fragmented marketplace, you see this from the corporate world also, you can't be everything to everybody, right? And the BJP understands that it doesn't have the baggage of also having to appeal to Muslims. It can have the single message of Hinduism. Congress's DNA can never afford that, which is why even today it feels like the Congress is schizophrenic. But that's the design of the Congress that Gandhi created. That 100 years from now has not changed. It's the Big Tent party of Indian nationalism.
But Gandhi is a very interesting example of wanting to be Ishwar Allah Tero Naam. I am Sabko Sarmati De Bhagwan. I can be inclusive. My politics can accommodate all. Today you're calling that confused marketing.
I think the confused market. So look, that it's a good question, right? So what's the line between being inclusive or what's the line between being everything to everybody and nothing to nobody? That's the question you're asking, right?
And also that in Gandhi, you have an example of very powerful mass mobilization. Very inclusive politics. We don't know if Gandhi had lived, how those politics would have survived electoral tests. I don't know the answer to that. But I just wonder, and the reason I raise this is it's often been suggested that the Gandhian idea of religion and politics is the counter to the Nehruvian consensus. But you are suggesting, if I'm understanding you correctly, and I'm taking my time so I phrase this correctly, that when you try and be an answer to both Hindus and Muslims and all communities as Gandhi did, you're actually spreading yourself so thin that your product is confused.
Yes. And you have to therefore change the conversation.
Yes.
So what did Advani do in 1990, right? He realized that it's very hard to mean everything for upper caste voters and, and for backward caste voters, but you have to get both together. So he does enough to be able to get both together, but the conversation changes to Ram Mandir. So yes, I mean, Gandhi was very inclusive, but the central feature of his politics wasn't, to give what, Hindus what they want, what Muslims what they want. It was this larger anti-colonial vision, right? So the one solution to this idea, right, is that you can mean everything to everybody on religious lines, but change the conversation to development between the haves and the have-nots, right? Or whatever else. So as a political entrepreneur, you can change the conversation where you sharply target yourself, and the conversation you de-emphasize can be inclusive.
But it's tough to do that in today's context, because Modi, I don't know how you see it, but if I were to look at it as a student of politics, Modi has welded Hindutva, nationalism, welfareism, created a sort of new recipient of the state's welfare schemes in the Labharthi, sort of idea of the Labharthi community. So, for the opposition, for anyone who's opposed to the BJP, what is the ideological space? If there's Hindutva Fevicol on one side, what do you see on the other?
So, Barkha, I've said this before on your show, you don't need, in the short term, the opposition should not worry about ideology, right? Because, I mean, what is the ideology that connects, Samajwadi Party, Congress? It's a Belpuri. Shiv Sena. So why are you wasting your time on it will evolve. There will be competition within. As far as the opposition...
So when Rahul Gandhi says ye vichar dhara ki ladai hai, you think that's bunkum?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's bunkum. I think that his vichardhara is not shared by his allies.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
It's not shared. So why not, learn from what the Janata Party did in 1977, which is create short-term organizational unity. 62% of Indians don't vote for Narendra Modi. That's a fact. Despite all this, 1 in 2 Hindus don't vote for Narendra Modi. There is, yes, all this Hindutva, but 50% of Hindus are there.
In the Westminster system, you can't measure it by percentage of votes, right?
That's right. But if the Congress were to move to, from I think it's an 18 to 20% party roughly right now, if it just moves to about a 25-26% party.
I mean, it governed, if I'm not wrong, the UPA had 28% of the vote or something like that.
That's right. That's right. But I'm saying the Congress today. So all the Congress, if who am I to give advice, right? As I said, as an academic, I look at the past, not the future. But if there's just one simple question, which is, can you get together to just up your vote share a little bit and hit the BJP vote share a little bit, and in the next election, the BJP becomes a 220-seat party, and let's say the India with the Congress at the helm, the Congress becomes a 120-seat party. That's a very different India, and that does not require a grand articulation of an anti-Hindutva Fevicol ideology by the Congress, by the opposition party.
And for you, the contrast to the Hindutva Fevicol is the imploding India alliance.
Yeah, and that contrast is not ideological, it is organizational. This is the key. Like in India, people go on and on and on about ideology, right? But look at the party structure itself. The BJP, that's a huge, it's the unity, the way people say, okay, it has muscle, it has money, but that money doesn't lead to fragmentation. In the Shiv Sena, the same money pouring in results in regional satraps and local heroes saying, if I am able to get so many crores by myself, why do I need Uddhav Thackeray? That doesn't happen in the BJP. So that core is something that, and it's a deep problem in Barkha. I mean, in media also you see this, that what begins as a large organization becomes a family enterprise. That is the way Indian system is organized, right? That this idea that, because in India, we are such a group-based society that unless there's a family tie or a caste tie, even a religious tie often is not enough to bring about trust. So ultimately, you'll only trust your son and daughter, right? The BJP and Hindu nationalism is very conscious of this problem in India. And the whole design of Hindu nationalism is actually, it's a deeply un-Indian party, right? I'll give you just one example of this. Why did Golwalkar insist that the pracharaks, about 5,000 of them, who are the permanent bureaucrats in the RSS, the permanent bureaucrats, not the volunteers, Modi was a pracharak, Advani began his career as a pracharak, why should they not be married? Why not? because he was terrified that if they were married, they'd have kids, right? Then their kids would get into the RSS. In my memory, there are, and this is a funny anecdote I have in the book, there are only 2 examples of senior RSS leaders who are allowed to marry and have kids, right? One is a man called Madhukar Rao Bhagwat, and the other is M.G. Vaidya. He's no more. One of them, M.G. Vaidya, was already married when the rule came. He was that old. And Madhukar Rao Bhagwat begged the Sasanchalak of the RSS, listen, I have an old mother. She needs to be married. She needs to be taken care of. If I'm single, who will take care? Please let me get married. 2 exceptions to that rule. Today, one of their sons is the number 1 on the RSS, and the other one, I think, is in the top 5 of the RSS, right? Yeah. So you make one exception to the rule, and immediately you're seeing what Nepo kids look like, right? Immediately. So look, I'm just giving you an example. We can talk to kingdom comes about ideology. How about just a simple question of unity? Given the fact that even without you having to propagate their ideology, 62% of India have not bought Mr. Modi's ideology.
But on this idea of Nepo kids, the BJP is today quite happy to import some of the Nepo kids into its fold.
Yes.
I don't remember the numbers offhand, but I think there's been good data on the last Lok Sabha, the 2019 Lok Sabha, to show that the percentage of dynasts in the BJP is actually increasing, right? And a lot of their imports from the Congress, while making a sort of psychological told you so moment to the opposition, what does that do to their argument against dynasty?
It's a good question, right? As I said, I'm good at predicting the past. So the larger question here is the quest for power. Short-term power, will it change what has made the BJP great? Right? That's the question, right? Because it has become
this is different.
But let's say successful. Let's use the neutral word, right? This is successful because, and look, people vote for Modi because he doesn't have kids. Let's put it bluntly, right?
The number of people I have met in travels who have said कि वो तो कभी corrupt हो ही नहीं सकते.
That's right.
क्योंकि उनके तो बच्चे ही नहीं है, तो वो किसके लिए छोड़ेंगे?
That's right.
This is how it's perceived. This Spartan 24/7 single man who's only working.
That's right.
How many people I've met perceive.
That's right. But look, at the top 4 decision makers in the BJP today, right? Mr. Modi,
yes.
Amit Shah,
yes.
Mr. Nadda,
yes.
Let's say B.L. Santosh.
Okay.
Not Nepo kids,
yes.
right? So the core decision makers, not Nepo kids. I haven't looked at the data on this, but look at the chief minister, especially the ones they're chosen. Doesn't seem to be any obvious Nepo kids there, right? You're absolutely right that, they also want to win, But the real question is that, is this, entry of Nepo kids into the BJP, is it just a short-term tactical measure? Or in the long term, will it just change the DNA of the BJP? That answer is also tied to how influential the RSS will remain in the BJP. RSS doesn't have Nepo kids. The whole design is structured not to have Nepo kids. So the more the RSS has a role in the BJP, the more hardline it is. But also, it's less corrupt in this nepotistic sense. That's a fact.
So this idea of breaking the sort of elite, Lutyens Delhi idea of India is a very interesting idea because it has, mirrors around the world. The idea of the pushback against the social elite, the liberal elite, the old elite, replacing the old establishment with the new establishment, and all of that. But in your book and in our conversations, you've made this point about how Advani was actually a Macaulay Putra.
That's right.
He was actually from a socio-economic milieu that could have been described as the English-speaking elite. So that's quite ironic, and I think a lot of people don't know that today.
Absolutely. Like Advani came from a very rich Karachi family. He comes from an Amil Sindhi community, which is a very educated community. And his own, this is secondary source, I didn't ask him this question, but these are secondary sources that I think his mother used to visit a dargah also, right? Because the kind of Hinduism practiced in let's say, the frontiers in Sindh, the Sindhis, there's a mix of, Sufi Islam, there's they go to Gurudwaras, there's a huge Sikh element to Advani's upbringing, like with many Sikhs. And of course, there's a Hindu upbringing, right? So that is him. On the other level, coming from a rich family, he went to St. Patrick's, he, as I said, he spoke English before he knew Hindi.
I mean,
right?
We were joking that he was the Khan Market gang.
He was a Khan Market gang. He was Khan Market gang, right?
Yes.
Except he was a partition victim. And the except is a big except, right? Yes. Partition ruined his family, ruined it, right? Yeah. It moved his family to poverty. And also his idea, he understood that underlying this, or let's put it this way, there are hyenas and vultures always lurking around this cosmopolitan world, which on hindsight, in his mind looks fake. That the Sindh he grew up in was not a real Sindh. The underlying religious and animosity is the real world, right? So I think that's a very important component, to kind of understand the man, right? But at the same time, his liberalism always had to kind of push back against his trauma as a partition victim. And I think that's really how you have to kind of understand the man.
But this same man who was once described as the hawk to Vajpayee's dove and maybe sort of lazy media tropes, towards the end of his career goes to Pakistan, praises Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and all hell breaks loose. And this party that he has literally helped build and take from 2 seats to 89 comes after him.
Yes.
What happens to Hindutva Fevicol in that moment?
It's true, they come after him, right? He resigns.
Yes.
But he stays in the party. He doesn't leave the party. Yes, so as I said, there are differences of opinions there, hugely. Forget on these issues, on economic issues, the differences are enormous. On reservations, the issues, they are huge. There are many within the BJP even today who are uncomfortable with reservations, right? There are debates. Even today, there are a huge amount of debate. But ultimately, did it result in the party becoming weaker or stronger? It did not result in the party becoming weaker. The same tension, had it happened in the Congress, the Advani equivalent of Congress would have left, would have started his own party, would have behaved like Amrinder Singh. Yeah. Exactly like Amrinder Singh. But that doesn't happen, right? Let me ask you this question. In which other party in India will a Madhya Pradesh chief minister who's won so many times, has won again on his name, yes, Mr. Modi's name on his name, right, is not made chief minister again, A? In which other party will have the guts to do it? And when that happens, he doesn't protest, he doesn't say anything publicly. He said, I continue to be, and I know from internal sources, he's seething. Right?
Of course. But is that Hindutva Fevicol, Shivraj Singh Chauhan's relative sort of meek acceptance of what has happened? Or is it the power of Modi?
No. There's no doubt that as an individual, Shivraj Singh Chauhan will have a better career at this moment if he leaves the BJP and starts a regional party in Madhya Pradesh. He will, of course, not do well, but, from being now not having any power, he will have some power. He'll have 3-4 MLAs. This is what happens in India.
Yeah.
That former chief minister leaves, you will have 10-20 MLAs. You're your Raja in your small pond.
Yeah.
So in his immediate self-interest, he's very popular in Madhya Pradesh still. He can do it, right? Of course, he will not be able to counter the Modi machine, but he will be able to carve out a space for himself. But that is not how he is thinking. My sources tell me that he is now thinking for the post-Modi era, because he's still in his 60s. He's still a young man, relatively, by Indian politics. Yeah. Why is only a Congress or BJP person able to think like this? Or let me ask you another question. Look at Fadnavis, chief minister of BJP. The BJP gets the largest number of seats in the legislative assembly, and he has to suffer the ignominy today of being one of 2 deputy chief ministers to somebody else. Which other party will you have the ability to do this without, and he's quite, of course, it hurts.
But do you see this as an illustration of the ideology that binds the Fevicol? Or do you see this as something that could happen in Modi's BJP but not in Vajpayee's BJP?
No, it happened in Vajpayee's BJP. It is not ideology per se. The communists are a deeply ideological group.
Yes.
They split on ideology. Right? What's the difference between the CPI, the CPM and the CPML?
Yeah.
It is not personality, it is ideology. They have a different worldview, or one feels that they have a purer color of red compared to the other person. So ideology is not a glue. Ideology forces you to split. In this case, as I said, in the book, that it comes from them being inculcated from early on a certain view of Hindu history, where Hindus are weak, because they don't fight with each other, because they don't stand with each other, because they fight against each other, which allows them to be invaded. If you want to avoid being invaded by democratic politics, you cannot make that mistake. From an early age, the RSS, it gets into their worldview, right? That's the secret Fevicol. It's not ideology per se. Because in India, like the BSP is an ideological party. Why has it split the way it has split?
Yeah. But to come back to...
Or let me add, what can be more ideological than the Dravidian movement? And then why did MGR and Karunanidhi fight? Was it because of... No, there's no ideological difference between the AIDMK and DMK, and yet why are they at daggers drawn?
Correct. But to come back to this construct Hindu nationalism. One a trivia detail which you pointed out in your book, Nasli Wadia. You try very hard to interview him. You don't manage to directly.
Yeah.
But the grandson of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the architect of Pakistan, is actually a key funder of the Hindu nationalist movement.
Well, let me use your podcast to make a direct appeal to Mr. Wadia. Please reply to my WhatsApps. I guarantee you a fantastic book about business and politics in India through the 300-year history of the Wadia group with plenty of masala about you, So please, reply to my WhatsApps, my texts, my emails. Fascinating character, right? Also shows you that, because, he's fighting with Dhirubhai Ambani, but even before that, and he's a contrarian, famous contrarian, knows how to fight, is the kind of foster son of Ramnath Goenka in some sense. Ramnath Goenka is closely associated to the RSS. So you have this what can be more anglicized, right, than the Wadia group. They have their own coat of arms, right?
I know that.
Yeah, they have their own coat of arms, right? And if my memory serves, you can all Google this and prove me wrong. I think that, a key moment in the American War of Independence was signed on a ship built by the Wadias, right? So they have moved from, what to Britannia today, right? And here's this man who's a key ingredient of Hindu nationalism, who's the first big ticket funder of the Jansangh before Bombay industrialists would touch it. Look, as now, this idea that, the industrialists today are kind of kowtowing to the current government is not a new idea at all in India. Capital always hedges their bets with whoever is going to be in power. There's no deep ideological question here. It's not that suddenly rich businessmen have become saffron. It's simply that they've made a risk calculation about who is going to win the next elections. It's as simple as that. And in that scenario, very few Bombay-based rich businessmen would fund the Jansangh or fund anyone other than the Congress party. The Congress party had a stranglehold on big ticket funding. So you would have some local baniyas, local kind of, small scale businessmen in North India who would give small amounts of money to Nanaji Deshmukh, right? But nothing of the scale. So the two people who brought funding scale to Hindu nationalism was Rajmata Vijayaraje Scindia, who had feudal money, and Nasli Wadia, who had modern capitalist money, right? And it tells you it's a very, very interesting story. So, the one thing I would again request those who hate Hindu nationalism, understand your enemy. Like, spend time understanding the internal diversity, the internal contradictions, and, what can be more contradictory than the grandson of Muhammad Ali Jinnah being one of the biggest funders of Hindu nationalism before, and doing so as an act of bravery. In fact, I'm wondering why is he not being given a Padma Bhushan, because he stood with them when nobody else was willing to do it.
When they were not in power.
When they were not in power.
Or when they were not powerful.
Yeah.
But, you have spoken about the internal diversity. You just mentioned that word, internal diversity of the Sangh. Your argument is that the Sangh is not so exclusionary when it comes to, let's say, caste. It actually wants reform, this idea of temple reform and so on. So it's trying to shed the stereotype. And I think it has also, the BJP certainly has, of being Brahminical. But it's exclusionary when it comes to other religions. Now, to that end, do you believe that the ideology of a Vajpayee, of a BJP before Modi and a BJP after Modi is different? Because if you look at, for example, images, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, whom we just discussed, not now, but in his earlier tenures, would wear a skull cap and go and hug someone from the Muslim community. Atal Bihari Vajpayee, if memory serves me right, by the end of it was hosting iftar parties at the Prime Minister's residence. Modi would not do all that in the Indian context. He would certainly, he has a very different imagery when he's, for example, touring the countries in the Gulf. Right? Very, very close relationships with all of those Arab leaders. But a very different imagery deployed here. And so Shivraj Singh Chauhan gave up that skull cap. He gave up the Mamaji who would wear the topi and go and hug a Muslim. So has something not changed in expression, even if it hasn't in ideology?
No disagreement with everything you said right now. Something has changed. The question is
what is
why?
That? First, what is that something?
No, what you described is the something. Okay. Right? No question about it, right?
No, but then recently, I should add that Prime Minister met a delegation from Ajmer gave the chadar.
No, but this is an explicitly Hindu party, right? There's no two ways about it.
Now or always?
No, now, right? There's no two ways about it, right? It's the Prime Minister is inaugurating what will for the next 1,000 years be one of the most sacred sites in Hinduism. He is the Jajman.
Yes.
Right? The distinction between the state and the Hindu religion has completely fused. There's no two ways about it. The question is why, right? That's the question, right? And consider, at least if the argument of my book is right, that at least some of this is demand driven, that the Hindu voter has changed. Consider that for a minute. Everyone goes on and on saying that the media is captured, this is captured, but yet maybe the Hindus want to see something else. They have a different view, right? And very little research has been done about this. But maybe, that as Hindus move from villages to cities, the relevance of jati, which is a highly local, don't use the word caste, the relevance of which is a contextual issue, evaporates a little bit, and the role of religion as this broader umbrella comes up. We don't know because there's some scattering scholarships and papers, but the demand side, because everybody talks about the supply side, that the nature of leadership, the control of ED, etc., but what about the demand side, right? When you see all these kind of like warmongering anchors on television, Barkha, no names, right?
I can name a few, but it doesn't matter.
But are they being, like, what is driving them? I suspect at least part of it is a drive for TRPs. And that TRP is ground up. It's not fully manufactured, right? And to acknowledge that would be to acknowledge that maybe the Indian voter has changed too. Right? And
yet you say that if you break it down in percentage, 62% is not voting.
Yes.
So to identify this market, it's the same argument I'd make in television.
Yes.
What happened in television? You had a sort of tabloidization, but you also had this warmongering, nationalist, sort of, what do I call them? Hashtag patriots kind of TV culture.
Yeah.
And what did the others do? The others who used to be different, they became paler versions of the same.
Yeah.
And then suddenly nobody was different and nobody had any distinction. And so people maybe continue to watch the original person or persons who did this.
Yeah.
In politics, it's a similar thing that we're seeing unfold. There is the BJP there's this template of politics, explicitly Hindu. And then now there's everybody else defining themselves against this and not finding a way to define themselves.
Yeah, but why are they not able to define themselves? In part because they're terrified that the voter has changed. Let me give you a simple example of this. Barkha. The line that during the Ayodhya movement in the 80s, there was a line saying, Mandir wahi banayenge. Mandir wahi. We will make the temple there.
Yes.
The word wahi was seen as a violent word. Simple word. Why there? You can make a temple. Why will you want to make it on top? So imagine in the 80s, our definition of what a provocative sentence is wahi. From that, look at the kind of sentences that come out in politics today, and it's accepted. It flies. There is bulldozer Raj. Is any opposition leader complaining? Not complaining, right? Part of it is, I don't think the opposition is a bind because the voters, they think they understand very well, are changing. That said, there are still plenty who have not fully bought into the idea of Hindu nationalism, who may, like Modi personally, his personal ratings are very high, but they may not like the local BJP politicians, which is why let the dust settle on these questions, Barkha. Look, this is a moment in India which we will remember for decades to come. But let's just wait up on what should the larger ideological counter to the BJP. There exists already some clay. Let's make a murti on it with the clay that exists.
I think, but as you say, it's very important to understand something before you oppose it or support it.
Yeah.
So in 2020, when you said we are already living in a Hindu Rashtra.
Yes.
What did you mean?
That the idea of Hindu Rashtra, as conceived by Savarkar, is perfectly compatible with one person, one vote democracy. You may not call it a constitutional democracy, or you can call it a constitutional democracy. You may not call it a liberal democracy. It is based on one person, one vote. The underlying genius of Savarkar, and I use this in a descriptive sense, is, look, why did he title his essay? The essay the word Hindutva had been used before, but he really popularized it. His idea is not what is a Hindu, it's who is a Hindu. Because Ganit Shastra, in this age in which power is distributed by one adult, one vote, who is a Hindu, counting Hindus matters hugely, right? And for early Hindu nationalists, they understand with clarity that as the British are introducing elections in India, they say, we love elections. Why do we love elections? Because at that time, I think 70% of British India were Hindus. Today it's 80%. So what's the problem? You need, like as Modi has discovered, you only need half of all Hindus to vote for you. And you are in total command and control, right? The error is people take Western notions of democracy, embedded with liberalism in it, and said that, look, of course it's not a liberal government, but it's a very democratic government. As one of the top leaders, I won't say how top, told me for this book, we worship God by winning elections. So where's the Hindu Rashtra is the idea of a Hindu nation which finds voice through elections. This is what it looks like. What's the problem?
And that is why you find the use of the word fascist
absolutely
completely misplaced, wrong, and lazy.
And more importantly, you can have this dinner table conversation saying fascist. You're not going to beat them. Understand? They win because people vote for them.
That's right.
And that is the central idea, right?
So when this debate rages on,
yes,
on democratic backsliding,
yes,
and to some degrees, it's from the West, it's often a hypocritical debate. There's an asymmetry of power that I think many Indians resist, whether or not they vote BJP. But where do you come in on that debate? I
wish they called it liberal backsliding. That's empirically true. If you define liberalism to being that the focus on the individual, this is not, this explicitly Hindu nationalism focuses on the group. That's the whole point. The whole idea of the RSS is the abandoned individual self-interest, focus on the group. The group has views. So it's not based on individuals. It's not based on individual rights. There's no two ways about it, right? But the word democratic, then the question is, how do you define democracy? Everybody has a different definition of democracy. The most common sense definition of democracy is some version of rule by majority, right? If 4 people are in the room and 3 want to have Chinese food and 1 wants to have Thai food, you would argue that the democratic answer is to have what 3 out of 4 want. That's how we intuitively think of it, right? That intuition is what the BJP follows, right?
So the question is, what happens to the person who wants to have Thai food?
That is the, politicians, political science from Greece and ancient Rome have been trying to answer this question. That how do you, under ideas of majority rule,
yes,
how do you think about minority rights without impairing the first principle? You can't have minority rights in a way that so this is the balance that has to be struck.
So, going from the BJP before Modi, let's talk about a little more about...
Let me ask you one more question, Barkha. You've been following Indian politics on a granular level. In the last 8 years, has the engagement of ordinary Indians in politics increased? Answer is yes.
Yes, I would say yes.
To me, that's what democracy is about.
Yes. I believe that the BJP wins fair and square at elections. And loses also loses elections in states at least, right? So that is also something to examine. What happens to Hindutva Fevicol in state elections? Have you applied your mind to that?
Well, I haven't, because as I told you, Barkha, I'm good at predicting the past, right? But if you just look at it, the BJP is now on the hunt for, congressmen, congresswomen, to kind of further. They will always be an Ayaram, Gayaram element to it. No doubt about it. But, to me, if someone like Jagdish Shettar, died in the whole RSS man, he left, there's an earthquake. Shankar Singh Waghela left, there was an earthquake. And, Jagdish Shettar has had Ghar Vapsi, he's back, because it was not a divorce, it was a separation, right? The underlying idea holds, and I think the underlying idea will continue to hold as long as the RSS is central to the BJP organization, because that also, the way to understand RSS and BJP is they operate at different timelines. They want slightly different things, right? The RSS has a much more of a long-term vision, which is why they are less swayed by, can we just, get this person for the elections? They also see the benefits of it, but they're less swayed by it. So as long as the RSS has its centrality in the BJP organization, I think that issues of nepotism, issues of splits and fissures will be a lot less than in other parties.
I want to come back briefly to this, this idea of, as you said, in the RSS, this brahmachari life, this Spartan life. and the relationship between the RSS and the BJP. Now, let's look at Vajpayee first.
Yeah.
In your book, you did write about Vajpayee's unconventional personal life.
Yes.
Right? His cohabitation with Mrs. Kaul.
Yes.
Married to Mr. Kaul.
Yes.
Their children who became Vajpayee's own foster family, as it were. And this complete acceptance in an otherwise socially conservative milieu of this very, very unconventional personal choice.
Yeah.
In fact, if I think about it, a number of BJP leaders, at least of that generation, have had deeply unconventional personal lives, including women. You know, I can think of Vasundhara Raje Scindia and Uma Bharti, to name two, who come to mind immediately. It's Mr. Advani who had the much more conventional picket fence, family life, and all of that. What do you make of that? That on the one hand, you have the RSS pracharaks, you're not allowed to marry, two men have to take permission to marry. Then there is a Vajpayee. I mean, I'll come to Modi in the end, who's this sort of, single figure without children. What do you make of that?
Well caught, Barkha. I hadn't quite, in my book, I wish I had, stolen your idea earlier, which is that, for all, his, the Advani himself is very conservative lifestyle.
Yeah.
Personal lifestyle is like spotless, very conservative, traditional lifestyle, even though Macaulay Putra. My own sense of this, Barkha, is that, and let me say something again counterintuitive, right? Hindu nationalism is not a traditional quote-unquote conservative organization, right? It's not. It is not the same as being from the Gorakhpit, right? Or being a Shankaracharya, right? The entire idea of Hindu nationalism is it's a modernist response to what they felt was the crisis of Hinduism. And their response was that we have to move away from the weaknesses of traditional Hinduism, right? So, I mean, forget the RSS itself, the brahmacharya, everyone in the organization being a brahmacharya is an unconventional lifestyle. So what do RSS pracharaks who don't have their own family, they make somebody else's family their family, right? Modi, until he became Gujarat Chief Minister, you live in a lot of families' houses because you don't have your own family, right? So the whole structure is unconventional. Its critique of traditional Hinduism is an unconventional critique, right? And third, its focus on unity above all else means that it has to accept different kinds of views and lifestyles. Because if you are being iron-handed to say that everybody has to look a certain way, talk a certain way, etc., then how can you ensure unity?
Was Vajpayee judged for his personal choices by the RSS?
Well, clearly not enough to prevent him from becoming Prime Minister of India 3 times in a year. 3 times.
And he was Prime Minister with this...
He made no bones about it. And I have a story in the book.
Yes.
Sourcing, I got to tell you, unfortunately, I couldn't put footnotes, but it's impeccable, which is that in the 60s, Golwalkar calls him and says, look, this is a problem. You can't be living with, you can't be living in this kind of situation. And Vajpayee...
Because he's living with someone who's married and her husband.
And he loves her, to put it out there, and, but he refuses to back down, and he and they continue it. I mean, so it's not that there are no tensions. It's not that there are no points of view, but just think of any family in India, Barkha, between the young and old now in this WhatsApp generation, heavy tensions. I've heard so many families of whether you love Modi or dislike Modi, that's a family fight. I'm sure you've heard about that too. Family doesn't break, right? Family remains, even though you have all these tensions within.
Yes.
That's how you have to see the RSS.
I was just thinking Vajpayee was a blended family before we knew the term.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But look, I mean, it's, he said, this is who I am. He was not woke, right?
Yeah.
This was not his articulation. He was not, he loved.
He was not doing this to be trendy and modern.
None. He just loved, he fell in love, that as simple as that. And, I end the book with saying this, which is that for all the issues the RSS had when Mrs. Kaul passed away, the RSS leadership came for the funeral, A, right? B, when Vajpayee passed away, it was a woman who lit his funeral pyre, who is his foster daughter, Gunnu, right? These are radically and the RSS was there to sanctify it. So, again, if you dislike the RSS, don't take your ideas of what traditional and conservative means from a Western context. They're extraordinarily, yes, they have worldviews. There's no two ways about it. But their flexibility on this and their, I'll give you another example. You look at Mohan Bhagwat's speeches over the years. In fact, even recently, he said something that can be interpreted as support for gay rights, right? Because that's to try to catch him and try to import within him this vision you have of what an upper caste conservative male looks like. you would be the loser, not them, because they are far more flexible on this area.
But this still leaves the question of 200 million Indian Muslims.
Yes.
And where does this understanding of the Hindu Rashtra that you believe existed in 2020 or maybe even before, where does that leave us?
It's a difficult question. I can't answer that. I just don't know what the future holds there.
And would that answer lie in ideology? Would that lie in politics? Would that lie... You see, there used to be this old assumption in the Vajpayee time that you can only govern India from the center.
Yeah.
Modi has, of course, shown that that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Right? You can set your own terms for how you govern it.
Yeah.
And he also enjoys being unpredictable.
Yeah.
And therefore, this could go either way. You could either see a outreach, as has begun with Pasmanda Muslims, or you could see more of the same. We don't know.
I have no sense of where that story ends.
What is the RSS thinking on it?
I have no idea. And look, I think, Barkha, the RSS, and if you ask me, I don't have that many sources anymore that you have, because once I finish a book, I forget about it and move to the next book. But those older sources, when I was working on my book, that, are still kind of, somewhat relevant. And a few of them are ministers, but mostly my sources are the have-beens, right? My sense is that they are stunned by how quickly India has changed. So I think they're also grappling. It's not, this idea that, yes, India today is a Hindu Rashtra, but this idea that, I don't think, if you ask me...
But not a theocracy. I just want to be clear that when we use this phrase, we have to be very clear.
It's not a theocracy, because the word theocracy
the state has a religion.
And it has a certain Abrahamic history.
That's right.
Right?
There's no church here.
There's no church here. So what, where is the fusion of the church and state? Like, where is it happening? But, when you asked about, how, what's the future for Indian Muslims, I don't think, and again, these are speculations, I don't have like rigorous research on this, but I'll give you my insight, just talking to a few insiders, is that I don't think they realized India would change so quickly. I think they are stunned. Right. If you ask me, whatever. I haven't met, Mr. Amit Shah recently, and, I haven't met Modi. But if you ask me, they can't believe India has changed this much. That doesn't now, when I tell this to my progressive friends, they say that, oh, you're giving them that's not the point here. It's that they've imagined a certain transition that has happened far quicker than even they expected.
They were ready for it.
So I think they're still grappling with what India looks like in the future. But on the Muslim question, I simply don't have an answer.
The new Jugalbandi. Is there a new Jugalbandi? Vajpayee and Advani were very much... I want to see a relationship of near equals, because you argue that Vajpayee was clearly the boss. And Advani accepted that. Obviously, there's no doubt about Modi being the boss. But are Modi, Shah even the new Jugalbandi, or is there no Jugalbandi? Because if you look at the sort of visual language created around Prime Minister Modi, it's always solitary. You actually don't, when he's photographed, whether it's the Lakshadweep moment, whether it's him prostrate at the steps of Parliament, except for the Mandir, where there was, him and others, including Mohan Bhagwat. There is the idea, when you close your eyes and you think of Modi alone. Is there a Jugalbandi anymore?
So what you described, which is that all the credit falls on one person, even if there's a Jugalbandi, has happened in Hindu nationalism for decades. So the idea of Jugalbandi, of having two people, comes from the fact that Hindu nationalism, like communism, is both a parliamentary party as well as a movement with a cadre. Yeah. So it's an NGO mixed with a parliamentary party. Congress is not that. The communists are the closest type. BSP is not that. Samajwadi Party is certainly not that. The cadre matters. So historically, when the Jansangh was being created, you had this division of labor where Shama Prasad Mukherjee would speak English. He could mesmerize parliament. He was the outside spokesman. But the person who spoke to the cadre was Deen Dayal Upadhyay, right? Vajpayee and Advani were a Jugalbandi because they fit these contrasting roles. These contrasting roles were socially engineered, right? That Advani, and Vajpayee came together because Deen Dayal Upadhyay felt that Vajpayee needed somebody who could do what Vajpayee could not do. And hence, Advani goes there as secretary. So it's a social engineering. Yeah. Now, the question is that these two roles of the parliamentary, speaker and debater and the organization man, do they neatly break up when it comes to Amit Shah and Modi, and I don't think so, because I think both can do both.
Yeah.
Or I would rather say that Modi and Amit Shah both are in some sense cut off Advani's cloth, which is that they are men of the cadre. They are men of the movement, right? They have, both of them, especially Mr. Modi, has something I think Vajpayee and Advani don't. And I use this advisedly, that Modi is a mass leader. And I mean that in a very specific sense. He could win states. Vajpayee, Advani, that's not how they worked. Vijay Raje's India could win a state, right? That she was, in that sense, I would call a mass leader. Vajpayee, Advani, that's not how you kind of think of them, right? Modi, like Indira Gandhi, had an intuitive feel of changes on the ground. Advani certainly didn't. For Advani, any change of the ground is filtered through the cadre, right? And for Vajpayee, any change on the ground was filtered through parliament. So in this sense, they are a bit different. But nonetheless, whether in one person or two people, Hindu nationalism always needs this Jugalbandi between its parliamentary face and its organizational muscle. Always.
You've written about the BJP before Modi. Have you applied your mind to what the BJP might look like after Modi?
No, as I said, it's very hard for me even to look at the present.
No, I ask you this, and I'll tell you why I ask. Today there's a perception that Modi is bigger than the party.
Yes.
Mr. Kharge, the opposition leader, made the Prime Minister laugh when he looked at all of the BJP MPs and he said to them, "Ki aap sab yahan pe Modi ji ki wajah se ho." This is the opposition acknowledging that Modi is winning the BJP the elections. Yes, there's an organizational machinery. Yes, there's the Hindutva Fevicol. But in the end, if you took away Modi and you put somebody else there, then all of these other ingredients may not lead to the same result, right? Is Modi today bigger than the BJP and the RSS?
Of course. But the question is the following, that has it been at the cost of the BJP in the RSS? No, it hasn't. Unlike Indira Gandhi, and I've discussed this with you on your show, Narendra Modi has not split the party, has not made the party organization moribund, not at all. The General Secretary organization, B.L. Santosh, is as powerful as General Secretary organization was in previous times. Like Govindacharya was so powerful in the early 90s in that position.
Yeah.
So B.L. Santosh is that powerful now. He's in some sense.
Yeah, but the RSS could veto a ministerial choice in the Vajpayee government. I don't think that could happen today.
So they did it, but Vajpayee defeated them. I know exactly the example you gave, but Jaswant Singh came back.
Yes.
Right? So RSS was, in fact, the RSS was much weaker in that sense because Vajpayee didn't, felt that they had no role in governance and his allies backed him. Whereas today it's not the case. I mean, the RSS, they may not like the centralization of power in two people. But if you ask the longer question saying that what this government is doing, is the RSS happy with? Broadly, yes. There's no, and the RSS, the RSS's main aim is not ministerial appointments. It has another aim.
I guess my final question is this. You said in the beginning of our conversation that Modi is a soldier of a 100-year movement.
Yes.
Is Modi strong enough to refashion that movement, right? To take it in a completely different direction? Because Modi has done things outside of script. Let's say in his, the first time of his swearing in, inviting a Nawaz Sharif to it. His attempts at peace with Pakistan, which he then abandoned and took a much more hardline approach in Pulwama and Balakot. These were not expected of the Modi script. This is not what Modi would have sounded like when he was chief minister. Modi likes to disrupt the expectation. Just when you think you understand Modi, Modi does something totally different, right? Is Modi strong enough to change this 100-year-old script?
Yes, but he won't. Because that script is wired into him. And let me elaborate this, Barkha, which is that many of the things that is in the RSS's script is not what you and I call governance. And equally, many of the things in the script of governance, the RSS doesn't care about. Like, does the RSS have a view on demonetization? No. Does the RSS have a view on subsidy for electric cars in India? No. The RSS has a view on a particular bunch of things which are typically connected to the culture and HRD ministry.
Yeah.
There, the RSS even today has a strong foothold. But on the cool ministries, right, finance, foreign affairs, it's not like that's not the central preoccupation. On the issues the RSS cares about, Mr. Modi and the RSS are on exactly the same page. But that script is 30% of governance. There's still 70% of governance which has to do with the individual prime minister. And there Modi can be completely unscripted. The RSS doesn't have a view on whether Nawaz Sharif should be invited to a swearing in.
Yeah.
They definitely will have a view if Modi says the line of control should be the permanent border. There's an ideological view, and that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Right? But on 70% of what you and I call governance, the RSS is not just that's not what the RSS cares about, right? I'll give you another anecdote. My friends in the IAS tell me that when they're posted as district magistrates, as collector, so, for your younger readers, that's kind of the center of power in a district. It's not that the local RSS Pracharak is coming every day either, because RSS Pracharak does his own thing all the time. So you have to understand the RSS that it's not interested in 70% of what Narendra Modi does as Prime Minister, because there's plenty of disagreement within the RSS on that question. So they don't see it as a core ideological demand on the stuff that they think is core and ideological, on Article 370, on triple talaq, on the need for like a census, because the other big RSS fear is that Hindus will become a numerical minority in their own country.
Yeah, but this is, as Ashoka Qureshi book tells you, this is simply not.
That's a different question.
Facts.
That's a different question. The question is that RSS and Modi are 100% on the same script here. There's going to be no shift, no change. So if any of your listeners are RSS members, why would they not be happy with Modi?
Well, fascinating conversation, Vinay. We'll have to end it here, otherwise we could go on for hours.
Thanks,
but I'm looking forward to a sequel to this book. I hope it's coming. Is there one coming?
No, only after this government ends, after the current leaders exit the stage.
And are able to tell their stories.
Or those around them are able to tell the story. Thank you very much, Barkha.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.